Judge John Neely Kennedy Leavitt for wearing a Coss, only to discover he's a legal genius. John Neely Kennedy. Leavitt, a 29-year-old attorney with a sharp mind and an unyielding commitment to defending religious liberty, stepped through the glass doors of the Washington, D.C. local courthouse, his polished leather shoes echoing softly on the worn marble floor. The small silver cross pinned to the lapel of his navy blue suit jacket glimmered faintly under the morning light streaming through the high windows, a quiet nod to his deep-rooted faith from his hometown in Louisiana, where church bells rang every Sunday and community prayers were as common as summer storms. Today, he wasn't here to argue a case, but to observe a pivotal lawsuit. A group of Christians had filed a complaint against the city for banning public prayer in a local park, a cause that resonated with John's work at the Liberty Defense Fund, a nonprofit dedicated to protecting religious freedoms. President Donald Trump, a vocal supporter of such causes, had personally requested the fund's close attention to this case, and John, as one of their rising stars, was tasked with being their eyes and ears in the courtroom. His disciplined nature was evident in his appearance. Crisp white shirt, tailored black trousers, a leather document bag slung over his shoulder, and a phone ready to take meticulous notes. The courthouse buzzed with a chaotic symphony of murmurs, the clatter of keyboards from the clerk's corner, and the shuffling of restless citizens awaiting their turn for minor disputes, traffic tickets, contract disagreements, neighborly squabbles. John scanned the room, choosing a hard wooden chair in the middle row, setting his bag down with a soft thud. The silver cross caught the fluorescent lights overhead, but he paid it no mind, unaware of the curious glances it drew from others in the room. To his left, a middle-aged man, in a loud T-shirt emblazoned with "I am King" in bold red letters, fiddled with his phone, his sneakers squeaking against the floor. To his right, a young woman, her oversized necklace sparkling like a chandelier, whispered animatedly to her lawyer, her bracelets jangling with every gesture. John frowned slightly, noting the apparent lack of a strict dress code. In this courtroom, a stark contrast to the rigid decorum he'd expected from a place of law. The heavy wooden door behind the judge's bench swung open, and Judge Charles Hargrove, a 62-year-old veteran of the bench, strode in with an air of unyielding authority. His salt-and-pepper hair was combed back meticulously, his wire-rimmed glasses perched precariously on his nose, and his black robe hung as if freshly pressed, each fold sharp as a blade. The crowd fell silent, a collective hush settling over the room as he took his seat, his cold, piercing eyes scanning the attendees like a hawk surveying its territory. "All rise," barked David Brooks, a tall black bailiff with a stern face and a voice that carried like thunder. John stood with the others, his phone still in hand, his gaze fixed on Hargrove, studying the man who would preside over today's cases. The judge banged his gavel, the sound sharp and commanding, and declared in a deep, cutting voice, "This is a court of law, not a stage for personal expression." The session began with mechanical efficiency. Hargrove dispatched cases with the precision of a seasoned conductor. A man fined $50 for parking in a handicapped spot, nodded meekly, and paid without protest. A woman late on rent payments received a light warning and a payment plan. John scribbled notes, impressed by Hargrove's speed but unsettled by the cold detachment in his rulings, as if justice were a checklist to be ticked off. The man in the "I am King" T-shirt stood to argue a dispute over a noisy neighbor, and Hargrove didn't so much as glance at his flashy attire, letting him speak without comment. The woman with the chandelier-like necklace was called next, her jewelry clinking as she approached the bench. Yet Hargrove said nothing about her ostentatious accessories. John's frown deepened. Something felt off, a subtle inconsistency he couldn't yet pinpoint. Then, Hargrove's eyes landed on John. The judge paused mid-sentence, his hand stalling over a stack of papers, his glasses slipping further down his nose as his gaze narrowed. The room seemed to hold its breath. "You there, Leavitt?" Hargrove said, his voice icy, but tinged with a strange hesitation, as if he recognized something familiar. John looked up, unfazed, his posture calm but alert. The judge pointed a bony finger at John's lapel. "That cross on your jacket. It doesn't belong here. This courtroom is a neutral space, not a church." A murmur rippled through the crowd, heads turning to stare at John, some recognizing him from legal circles or news clips about the Liberty Defense Fund. The silver cross gleamed defiantly under the harsh lights, and John felt the weight of every gaze. He stood, his voice clear and steady, cutting through the tension like a knife. "I'm John Neely Kennedy Leavitt, an attorney with the Liberty Defense Fund, here to observe a case on religious freedom. This cross is a personal item protected by the First Amendment. It violates no court rules." Hargrove's face tightened, his lips curling into a thin line. "This is my courtroom, Mr. Leavitt." He snapped, his tone rigid. "Neutrality is paramount, and that symbol disrupts it. Remove it, or face consequences." John's eyes flickered with resolve, his hand subtly adjusting his phone to activate its recording mode, the soft click inaudible to others. "With all due respect, sir," he replied, his voice unwavering, "if there's a specific rule banning religious symbols, I'd like to see it in writing." The crowd gasped softly, a few whispers breaking the silence. Mary Clarkson, the middle-aged court clerk with her hair pulled into a tight bun, paused her typing, her eyes darting to John with a mix of curiosity and unease. David Brooks, the bailiff, tilted his head, his stern expression softening slightly as he watched the exchange unfold. Hargrove's face flushed red, his knuckles whitening as he gripped his gavel. "You dare challenge my authority!" he bellowed, slamming the gavel down with a crack that echoed through the room. "I'm fining you $500 for contempt of court. Pay it today, or you'll regret it." The murmurs grew louder, a woman in the back row whispering to her neighbor, "Just for a cross? That's insane." The man in the "I Am King" t-shirt stifled a chuckle, quickly silencing himself as Hargrove's glare swept his way. The woman with the oversized necklace leaned toward her lawyer, her eyes wide with surprise. John stood his ground, his heels planted firmly on the creaky wooden floor, his expression calm, but his mind racing. He stepped closer to the bench, his voice measured but firm. "Sir, I understand your ruling, but I have a right to know why my cross is singled out. That man's t-shirt has a bold slogan, and her necklace is practically a light show, yet you've said nothing about them. Why is my faith the problem?" Hargrove's eyes narrowed to slits, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. "Don't change the subject, Mr. Leavitt. Your cross is a religious symbol, and it's inappropriate here. Step up to the bench now." John took a deep breath, his heels clicking lightly as he approached the defendant's stand. The silver cross gleaming like a small beacon amid the growing tension. The crowd held its breath, sensing something bigger was unfolding. Mary Clarkson resumed typing, her fingers trembling slightly, while David Brooks crossed his arms, his gaze shifting between John and Hargrove, a hint of recognition in his eyes. He'd seen this pattern before: Hargrove's selective enforcement against religious symbols, especially Christian ones. John rested his hand on the edge of the bench, his eyes locked on Hargrove's. "Sir, I'm here on behalf of my organization, doing my job. My cross doesn't disrupt anything. If you're citing a rule, I'm entitled to see it. If not, this feels like bias against my faith." Hargrove leaned forward, his glasses glinting under the lights, his voice dripping with disdain. "Bias, you're the one bringing religion into my courtroom, disrespecting the law. I am the rule here, and I say that Cross is contemptuous. Pay the fine or I'll have you removed." The gavel slammed again, the sound reverberating like a warning shot. The crowd's whispers swelled, a few pulling out phones, despite the no recording signs capturing the moment. John's grip on his phone tightened, ensuring the recording continued. He nodded slightly, as if confirming a suspicion. "Very well, sir," he said, his voice low but laced with steel. "I'll pay, but this isn't over. You're targeting my faith, and I'll prove it." Hargrove smirked a cold, humorless grin, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. John stepped back, his mind already mapping out his next move. He knew this wasn't just about a $500 fine. It was about exposing a deeper injustice, one that could ripple far beyond this cramped courtroom. As John returned to his seat, the room buzzed with suppressed energy. The man in the I Am King t-shirt whispered to his neighbor, "That guy's got guts." The woman with the necklace stared at John, her lawyer scribbling furiously. Mary Clarkson's eyes lingered on him, her fingers hovering over her keyboard as if debating whether to act. David Brooks, standing near the bench, gave John a subtle nod, a silent acknowledgement of the young lawyer's courage. John opened his phone quickly, drafting a post for X fined $500 for wearing a cross in D.C. court. "This isn't just about me, it's about religious freedom. #cross in court." He hit send, then emailed the recording to his colleagues at the Liberty Defense Fund, adding a note. "Hargrove targeted my cross. Need backup for next steps." As he slipped his phone back into his pocket, his phone buzzed almost instantly, a call from a senior advisor at the fund. "John, the president's team saw your post. Trump wants a full report." This could be big. John nodded to himself, the silver cross on his lapel catching the light once more, a silent promise that this fight was just beginning. If you're inspired by John's stand for justice and want to see more stories like this, please consider donating to our channel. Your support helps us keep bringing you powerful narratives that spark change and amplify voices fighting for freedom. Every dollar counts. Visit our website or scan the QR code on screen to contribute today. Together, we can keep the flame of truth burning bright. John Neely Kennedy. Leavitt sat in the dimly lit office of the Liberty Defense Fund, the glow of his laptop casting sharp shadows across his face as he pored over case files from Judge Charles Hargrove's courtroom. The silver cross on his navy suit jacket, still pinned proudly to his lapel, glinted faintly as he shifted in his chair. The confrontation in the D.C. local court had been mere hours ago, but its impact was already spiraling beyond the courthouse walls. His phone buzzed incessantly on the desk notifications piling up from X, where his post about being fined $500 for wearing a cross had ignited a firestorm. The hashtag #CrossInCourt was trending with thousands of comments, pouring in, some from strangers sharing their own stories of Hargrove's heavy-handed rulings, others from supporters rallying behind John's defiance. One user wrote, "Hargrove fined me $200 for a hijab last year. No explanation, just a smirk." Another posted, "My brother got a warning for a rosary in court. This judge is out of control." John's jaw tightened as he read the weight of their stories, fueling his resolve. This wasn't just about him anymore, it was about a pattern of bias that needed to be exposed. He leaned back, rubbing his temples, the memory of Hargrove's red-faced gavel slamming still vivid. The judge's words, "I am the rule here," echoed in his mind, not as a threat, but as a challenge. John had recorded the entire exchange, and the audio file, now safely stored in the cloud, was his first piece of ammunition. He'd sent it to his colleagues at the fund with a brief note. Hargrove's bias is clear. Let's build a case. As he scrolled through X, a new notification caught his eye. A post from President Donald Trump himself. John Neely Kennedy, Leavitt. A brilliant young lawyer just exposed a biased judge trying to crush religious freedom. We're with you, John Nabocross in court. The post had racked up 70,000 retweets in under an hour, and conservative outlets like Breitbart and Newsmax were already running headlines. Young attorney stands up to anti-Christian judge in D.C. John's phone rang, the caller ID flashing the name of Sarah Mitchell, a senior advisor at the fund, and a direct line to Trump's team. John, the president's thrilled, she said, her voice brimming with excitement. He wants this amplified. Prep a detailed report and be ready for a press conference. This could shift the narrative on religious liberty nationwide. John nodded, though she couldn't see him, his mind already racing with strategy. Back at the courthouse, the air was thick with tension. Mary Clarkson, the court clerk who'd watched John's confrontation with Hargrove, sat in the break room, her hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug. Her notebook, a small leather-bound journal she'd kept for years, lay open on the table, its pages filled with meticulous notes on Hargrove's rulings. For a decade, she'd recorded his tendencies, fines for crosses, warnings for hijabs, even a scolding for a Buddhist pendant, while slogan T-shirts and gaudy jewelry passed without comment. Today, John's calm defiance had stirred something in her. She pulled out her phone and texted a contact at the Liberty Defense Fund, attaching scanned pages from her notebook. I've seen Hargrove target religious symbols too many times, she wrote. John Leavitt's right. This needs to stop. Her hands trembled as she hit send, knowing the risk of speaking out, but feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. Across the hall, David Brooks, the bailiff who'd stood silently during the confrontation, was on his own mission. In the courthouse's cramped security office, he met with two colleagues, his voice low but firm. I've worked with Hargrove for 15 years, he said, pulling a handwritten log from his pocket. I counted 18 cases this year alone, where he fined people for religious symbols. 13 were Christians, 4 Muslims, 1 Buddhist. But a guy in a T-shirt saying, "Screw the system," Hargrove laughed it off. His colleagues nodded, one jotting down notes. We need to get this to the Judicial Council, David added. Leavitt's case could force a reckoning. By evening, their combined efforts, John's recording, Mary's notebook, and David's testimony, had reached the D.C. Judicial Council, triggering an emergency investigation into Hargrove's conduct. John, meanwhile, was building a legal fortress. At the Liberty Defense Fund's office, he gathered a small team of attorneys, their desks cluttered with coffee cups and legal pads. They dug into Hargrove's case history, pulling records from the past 3 years. The data was damning. 65% of dress code fines in Hargrove's court targeted religious symbols, with Christians bearing the brunt, 70 cases averaging $250 each, compared to $100 for secular violations like loud T-shirts or excessive jewelry. John highlighted a key precedent, Church of Lukumi Babalu I versus City of Hialeah, 1993, where the Supreme Court ruled that targeting religious practices without a compelling neutral reason violated the First Amendment. Hargrove's fines aren't random, John told his team, pointing to a spreadsheet on his laptop. He's systematically harsher on religious symbols, especially Christian ones. We can prove intent. His colleague Emily Chen, a sharp constitutional lawyer, nodded. This is a textbook case of selective enforcement. We file a formal complaint with the council citing Lukumi and demand a review of all his rulings. John agreed, drafting a complaint that outlined Hargrove's pattern, backed by Mary's notes and David's testimony. He also prepared a public statement, knowing the court of public opinion was just as critical. Opening X, he posted an update. Judge Hargrove's finds target, faith not fashion. We have proof, dozens of cases, mostly Christians penalized for their beliefs. Religious freedom isn't negotiable. Cross in court. The post exploded, hitting 200,000 views in hours with comments flooding in. Thank you, John, for standing up. Hargrove's been doing this for years. Someone finally called him out. Outside the fund's office, John faced personal pressures. His younger sister, Claire, called from Louisiana, her voice laced with worry. John, you're taking on a judge. What if this ruins your career? Mom's freaking out. John leaned against the window, the D.C. skyline glittering in the distance. Claire, if I don't fight this, who will? This isn't just about me. It's about everyone. Hargrove's silenced. Claire sighed, but relented. Just be careful, okay? You're too stubborn for your own good. John chuckled, promising to stay safe. His resolve was tested further when a friend from law school texted, Dude, you're poking a bear. Hargrove's connected tread lightly. But John's mind was made up. He wasn't just a lawyer. He was a believer, and the cross on his lapel wasn't just a symbol. It was a line in the sand. By the next morning, the #CrossInCourt hashtag had gone global with posts from Texas, Florida, and even London, where a lawyer wrote John Leavitt's fight reminds us religious freedom is universal. Conservative influencers amplified the story, one tweeting, This is why we need warriors like Leavitt. Hargrove's bias is an attack on the Constitution. John organized a press conference outside the courthouse, standing before a small crowd of reporters, activists, and curious onlookers. The silver cross gleamed as cameras flashed. I was fined for my faith, he said, his voice steady and resonant. But this isn't about one cross. It's about a judge abusing power to target beliefs. The First Amendment protects us all, and we're demanding accountability. He held up a printed copy of Mary's notebook page showing a list of fines for religious symbols and cited the Lukumi case, his words crisp and authoritative. The crowd erupted in applause, a few holding signs reading, Faith over fines. A reporter from Channel 7 News filmed live, her voice urgent. Today, attorney John Leavitt accused Judge Charles Hargrove of anti-religious bias, sparking a national debate on courtroom fairness. The clip went viral, hitting 1 million views by noon. Hargrove, holed up in his office, felt the walls closing in. His phone rang non-stop, reporters, colleagues, the Judicial Council demanding answers. He stared at a cold cup of coffee, muttering, He's just a kid. How did this happen? But the evidence was mounting. The council's lead investigator, Linda Martinez, a no-nonsense veteran with 20 years' experience, called Hargrove for a preliminary interview. We have data, Judge, she said, her voice calm but firm. 70 cases of religious symbol fines, mostly Christians with penalties, double the norm. Explain. Hargrove stammered. I was maintaining neutrality, but his words sounded hollow even to himself. He hung up his hands, shaking, knowing his 30-year career was teetering. Meanwhile, John received a call from Sarah Mitchell. The president wants you at a religious freedom summit tomorrow, she said. It's at the White House. Prep a speech. This is your chance to shape the narrative. John nodded, his eyes drifting to the cross on his jacket. The fight had grown bigger than he'd imagined, but he was ready. He opened his laptop, drafting a speech that would not only defend his actions, but call for systemic change, knowing that Hargrove's suspension was just the beginning of a larger battle for justice. John Neely Kennedy Leavitt stood on the stage of the White House's East Room, the silver cross on his navy suit jacket, catching the gleam of chandeliers as he faced a crowd of over 5,000 activists, faith leaders, lawmakers, and everyday Americans clutching banners that read, freedom of faith, and hashtag cross in court. The air hummed with anticipation, cameras flashing like fireflies, and the live stream on X was already racking up millions of views. John adjusted the microphone, his heart steady, despite the weight of the moment. "I came to a DC courtroom to do my job." He began, his voice clear and resonant, carrying over the hushed crowd. "But when a judge fined me for wearing this cross, I realized this wasn't just about me. It was about every person who's been silenced for their beliefs. This is our fight, and together we're rewriting the rules." The room erupted in applause, a thunderous wave that shook the ornate walls. A woman in the front row, holding a sign that read, "Faith over fines," wiped tears from her eyes. A young pastor shouted, "Preach, John." President Donald Trump, seated to John's right, clapped heartily, his grin wide as he leaned toward an aide, whispering, "This kid's a star." John's speech wove personal conviction with legal precision, citing the First Amendment and the Church of Lukumi Babalu I, Virtu City of Hialeah, case, framing his stand as a defense of constitutional bedrock. "The law isn't a judge's personal playground," he said, his eyes sweeping the crowd. "It's a shield for our freedoms, and we won't let it be twisted." The audience roared again, some standing, others live, posting on Swear H Cross. Court soared past 2 million mentions. A tweet from a Texas activist read, "John Leavitt's not just a lawyer, he's our voice. Faith wins." The speech, broadcast live by Fox News and shared across conservative platforms, became a rallying cry, with clips of John holding up his cross going viral, dubbed by one outlet as the symbol of unshakable resolve. Back in DC's judicial system, the fallout from John's confrontation was seismic. The DC Judicial Council, spurred by John's complaint and the damning evidence from Mary Clarkson's notebook and David Brooks's testimony, issued sweeping reforms. New regulations prohibited fines for religious symbols unless they demonstrably disrupted proceedings, and every court employee, from judges to clerks, was mandated to undergo First Amendment training. A bronze plaque was unveiled in the courthouse lobby, its inscription, "Bold religious freedom, a right beyond violation." Mary Clarkson, now promoted to oversee a transparency program, stood before the plaque's unveiling, her voice steady as she addressed a small crowd of reporters. "For years, I watched unfair rulings pile up," she said, clutching her notebook. "John Leavitt gave me the courage to speak. This plaque is a promise, no more bias." David Brooks, leading a training session for bailiffs, echoed her resolve. "We're the gatekeepers of justice," he told a room of young officers. "John showed us what happens when we stay silent. Never again." The reforms didn't stop at DC's borders. Inspired by John's fight, Texas passed a state law mirroring the new rules, with its governor tweeting, "John Leavitt reminded us what freedom means. Texas stands with him." In Ohio, a coalition of lawyers launched a review of local court practices, citing #cross in court as their catalyst. Even internationally, a Canadian faith group posted, "Leavitt's stand is a beacon for us all. Faith belongs everywhere." Charles Hargrove, stripped of his robe and title, sat in a modest conference room facing rows of court staff at the first mandatory training session. His hands clasped tightly, his voice raspy but sincere. He spoke without the arrogance that once defined him. "I thought I was upholding neutrality," he said, his eyes meeting those of his former colleagues. "But I was blind to my own bias. John Leavitt forced me to see it. Don't make my mistake. Justice has no room for prejudice." A few attendees nodded. Others scribbled notes, and one whispered to a neighbor, "Never thought I'd see Hargrove admit he was wrong." Hargrove had resigned days after his suspension, But his decision to volunteer as a trainer was a quiet act of redemption. He met privately with Mary Clarkson afterward, thanking her for her courage. "Your notebook changed everything," he said, his voice breaking. Mary smiled faintly, replying, "It was John who lit the spark." Hargrove nodded, knowing his career's end was a small price for the lesson he'd learned. John's impact reached beyond policy. Letters and emails flooded the Liberty Defense Fund's office, each one a testament to his influence. A law student from Florida wrote, "Mr. Leavitt, your fight inspired me to start a free legal clinic for people targeted for their faith. Thank you for showing me what courage looks like." A pastor in Georgia sent a photo of his congregation wearing crosses captioned, "Because of you, we wear our faith proudly." John read each message late into the night, his office lit only by a desk lamp, the framed $500 fine receipt hanging on the wall, a reminder of the day that changed everything. The movement he'd sparked wasn't just legal, it was cultural. On X, users posted pictures of crosses, hijabs, and Buddhist bracelets, captioned, "My faith, my right." A viral video from a young woman in Ohio showed her standing outside a courthouse holding a cross and saying, "John Leavitt fought for me, so I'm fighting for others." The video hit 3 million views, amplifying the call for justice. The White House summit wasn't the end, but a new beginning. John received an invitation from the Judicial Council to lead a national commission on courtroom fairness, a role that would take him across the country to train judges and advocate for systemic change. He stood on the White House balcony later that evening, the D.C. skyline aglow under a fading sunset, the silver cross cool against his fingers. His phone buzzed with a call from President Trump. "John, you're my warrior." Trump boomed, his voice brimming with pride. "You've got the whole country fired up. Keep pushing. We're winning big." John smiled, replying, "Thank you, Mr. President. I'm just getting started." Hanging up, he looked out at the city, the weight of his journey settling in. From a single courtroom moment, he'd ignited a movement proving that one person armed with knowledge and conviction could reshape a nation. The cross on his lapel, once a quiet symbol of faith, was now a blazing emblem of change, its light spreading far beyond the courthouse where it all began. If John Leavitt's fight for justice and freedom inspires you, please help us keep telling these powerful stories by donating to our channel. Your support fuels our mission to shine a light on those who stand up against injustice. Every contribution, big or small, makes a difference. Visit our website or scan the QR code to donate today. Together, let's amplify the voices that change the world.